squeeze muscle,
All right.
in and out.
All right. All right, let's start. I know you got some enzyme lecture, but let's continue now. We're going to talk about kinetics, enzyme catalyzed reactions. And we're going to discuss the Michaelis-Menten and other double Rock plot to determine some of those parameters are characterized really enzyme. So thermodynamics and enzyme kinetics, if you take any chemical reaction, for instance, in this case, a glucose, in the presence of oxygen, got oxidized to CO2 and a water. So as any chemical reactions, this is basically characterized by two independent properties, which is, the energy, basically the energy difference between the substrate and the product, which is delta G, and the rate of the reactions. And those two properties are completely independent, one from the other. So the energy content, or the energy difference between the substrate and the product, would dictate the direction of the reaction. But the rate is independent of that. Even though the reactions, in many cases, as you know, when delta G is negative, the reaction moves forward. You probably heard that, right? When the delta G is positive, so the reverse is spontaneous, but not the forward direction. If delta G is equal to 0, so you have equilibrium. So that tells you the direction of the reaction, but not the rate of the reaction. Is that clear? Good. So now we're going to talk about, you will see that even more in thermodynamics, in bioenergetics that Dr. Warren will talk about, Lucia. So here, what we're going to talk about is mostly the rate, what affects the rate, okay? Now, again, if you take a general reaction, A, substrate A converted to B, can be characterized by this formula, basically the rate of the reaction, can basically be determined by the loss of the substrate over time or occurrence of the product over time. Just like the speed of your car, your speed is the amount, the mileage you drive per unit of time. But for the reactions, the chemical reaction, the speed, which is the velocity, is the amount of loss of the substrate over time or the product occurrence over time. Same concept, okay? So change of substrate concentration over change of time, change of product concentration over change of time. Now, you can go further and characterize it, taking into account a constant called K, which is basically the rate constant. Given a substrate concentration times the forward reaction rate constant, K1, so you can determine the rate of reaction that way. Or the reverse, basically, the rate constant of the reverse reaction times the product formation, the product concentration. So now, we're going to talk about initial velocity. And I'll put this one in there to give you an idea what it really means, because you can apply the same thing, for those who play hockey or what's called the golf. When you hit the ball, at what point do you have the highest speed possible? At the initial state or at the later state? At the initial state. Exactly the same applied to, we call that the V0, the initial velocity. At that point, the speed of the ball is directly proportional to the force you apply to. You agree with me? So enzyme catalyzed reaction, same thing. When you add the substrate on an enzyme, the speed is directly proportional to the substrate at the initial time. All right? So that's what is called initial velocity. So when you're studying an enzyme, the velocity has to be measured at the initial state, because at that point you have high substrate concentration, but you also have low product concentration. So the reverse reaction will not occur. Is that clear? So initial velocity is the velocity at the initial state, within a second when you do an enzyme catalysis reaction. So once you add the substrate, you start measuring the velocity at that time point, very close, within a second, okay? And that velocity is directly proportional to the substrate concentration, all right? That's why you're gonna hear a lot about initial velocity. So I want you to have an idea what initial velocity means before we move forward. All right, so now here you have the curve. Now on the y-axis, you have your initial velocity of enzyme catalysis reaction. For a specific enzyme, pure enzyme in a tube, and you start adding substrates on. As the substrate concentration increases, what do you see in the velocity of the reaction increases, right? The amount of product formation per second basically increases. And it increases until you reach a certain point, a plateau there. And why is that? You keep adding substrate, but you cannot go beyond a certain point. What's going on? It's like you push in your car, you push the accelerator down, all the way down, but you only can go to a certain speed. Once you reach that, you can't go any higher than that. What is that? Vmax, right? That's your maximal velocity, your maximal speed. You can add substrate concentration as much as you want, you will not go beyond that, okay? And why do you have that maximal velocity in an enzyme catalysis reaction? Because you reach the maximum speed of the enzyme, okay? So the enzyme cannot go beyond, at least that concentration of enzyme cannot give you product beyond that level, okay? And we're gonna talk about that a little more, okay, the Vmax. So as the substrate concentration goes up, V0 goes up. So basically what happened if you take it in the kinetics, the enzyme form a complex with the substrate. So enzyme plus substrate form a complex called ES with this rate K1, okay? Now, but the K1, all these interactions are just a dynamic situation. They come together, but they can release each other too. So it's a dynamic, so the reverse reaction, they have a K minus 1, okay? The rate constant for association and the rate constant for dissociation. Now, ES can now be converted to EP, which is E product, by this rate called K2. K2 is very important, so we're gonna talk about that a little more, so, from now, keep paying attention to K2. But the product, when the product concentration reaches a certain point, the reverse reaction start taking place. So the product can also be converted to ES complex by K2, okay? So in order to avoid that, what should you do? For the product, you go back. You don't know, eh? More? Substrate. Not really. You already reach the Vmax. So the substrate concentration, the product is now formed. Now, when the product level go to a certain point, so the equilibrium is disrupted, so the reverse start taking place. So there is a reason for that, and you can avoid that, and we're gonna talk about that, okay? So, but keep that in mind, you want to avoid the product going back in the opposite direction, okay? All right, so Michaelis-Menten came, they came with these, in order to study the enzyme, they developed a model, okay? If you recall what I said in that case, EX complex form through the E plus S. Now you see, he said, okay, we're gonna neglect the reverse reaction. So the way to neglect the reverse reaction, the product would not be reverted back. The only condition to do that is to measure the initial velocity. Because at the initial velocity, the product concentration is almost equal to 0. Is that clear? So you measure the enzyme velocity at the initial state. So if you do that and you have the highest concentration of substrate, so at that point, the product will not be there to the point it will not, this reverse reaction doesn't exist. So you can neglect that, okay? Which makes things a little easier in order to develop this model of kinetics. So he said, as I said here, the reverse reaction of the product to substrate is negligible because we measure the enzyme reaction at the initial state, okay? And you have the highest concentration of substrate way beyond the enzyme concentration. So he made 3 assumptions, okay? The first assumption, the enzymes the substrate concentration is much higher than the enzyme concentration, which is really, you are all the way here, okay? Now, the next one is the steady state. So basically, the steady state means ES complex concentration is constant. The steady state, by definition, the rate of formation is equal to the rate of breakdown. So the enzyme concentration, ES complex is constant, okay? So like here, at any given time in August, you will find 160 students here. It doesn't mean we have the same 160 students. You guys leave next year, go to the second year, if new students will come and be here. So we always 160 students here, so that's the steady state. Is that clear? Okay, so the ES complex concentration doesn't change. So that's the steady state. Now the initial velocity, as I said, the enzyme kinetic reaction is measured at the initial velocity when the substrate concentration is the highest and the times is the shortest and the product concentration is the lowest. Okay, so initial velocity. So you made that three assumption, all right? So at that point, so the product formation only depend on the K2 because since the reverse reaction is negligible because the product is not there, so you can write the reaction this way, velocity, change the product concentration over time, or you can write the velocity is a K2, which is the kinetic constant of the ES transformation to EP, okay, times the E2 concentration, okay? So you can write the reaction, the product formation, or the velocity of the reaction that way, okay? Because again, this direction is negligible, okay? So keep this in mind. This is, especially the one in red is important, okay? So the velocity depends on the K2 and the ES complex, okay? All right, everything I say is summarized in this, so to give you a little bit of idea. Then at the initial state, okay, the ES concentration, once you add substrate at the highest concentration possible, the product concentration is at the lowest, so it's close to the initial state. Now, once you add the substrate, you see ES, that is here, the ES concentration is complex, constant, which is equal to ET. ET is mean the total enzyme concentration, okay? So all the enzymes now have a substrate on their site, okay? So at that point, ET and ES are exactly the same because all the enzymes are working, all right? So now you see, as the time passes, the free enzyme concentration drop, which makes sense, right? Because all the enzymes now have substrates on them, so no enzymes basically free, okay? So ES is constant. Now the product concentration is at the lowest at time zero, but you see as the time increases, you see the product concentration increase. So that's what you want to avoid. So you want to measure the initial state to avoid higher product concentration, because if that occurs, the reverse reaction will take place, okay? Is this clear? Right. Now, the steady state, okay? So ES is now your target. The ES complex is your target, okay? So if you want to measure the velocity, the steady state, then you said that the rate of formation of the complex, the ES complex, it's equal to the rate of breakdown, basically. So this is the rate of formation of the ES complex. It's equal to the rate of breakdown. So if you look at it, ES complex times the formation rate, okay? So you have your ES times K1, which is the rate of formation of ES complex. It's equal to these two, basically the ES breakdown in this direction and that direction. So ES times the K1 is equal to the rate of breakdown in this direction and the rate of breakdown in that direction as well. Okay, so the sum of two, okay? So basically, the rate of formation of ES complex is equal to the two rate of breakdown the one plus the other rate of breakdown. Is that clear? Okay, good. So that's the steady state. Now, they took that reactions, this basically equation, and worked it out. I'm not asking you to go over, if you want, we can free time, but that's not the target here. I'm not asking you to do the derivation. It's a very simple few steps, and then that can lead you to this formula. So basically what this says, the initial velocity of any substrate concentration, it's equal to the Vmax, once you know the Vmax, and you know the Km, which we're going to talk about, the Km, which is a kinetic constant for the enzyme. And each enzyme has its Km value for the substrate. And we're going to talk about that. So you said the velocity at any given substrate concentration here, Vmax times the substrate concentration that you have given over the Km plus the substrate concentration. So if you have this value, you can calculate V0 velocity at any substrate concentration. Okay? So Km is known because Km is specific for each enzyme. Okay? And then the Vmax is specific for the enzyme concentration and the catalytic rate constant. Okay? So we're going to talk about Vmax as well, and then you're going to clear up, the whole thing's going to be cleared up for you. But anyway, this is the formula. That's the Michaelis-Menten formula, and we're not going to go through the derivations, and all the parameters included in it are described here. Now, the physiological significance of Michaelis-Menten constant. The Vmax, I said a lot about Vmax, I said a lot about Km. Now, we're going to go a little more in details in them, what they really mean, okay, and how you can get them. Now, at any given substrate concentration, there is a velocity. So as the substrate concentration increases, as I said, the velocity increases up to you reach a plateau, okay? At that point, all the enzymes are working, okay? Now, there is no more enzyme free to now take on any substrate in order to increase the velocity. Does that make sense? So all the enzymes, so that's why you have a plateau here. All the enzymes are working, okay? So that's what it reaches when the active site, all the enzymes are occupied, and the velocity, maximum velocity, and the K2 times ET at that point. You remember I said K2 times ES, but ES is equal to K2 because ET, because all the enzymes now are working. So ES is equal to ET. Is that clear? All right. Now I have a little better description here that may help you understand a little more. All right. So when you start your free enzymes sitting in your test tube, no substrate is around, okay? No velocity will occur. So basically, you're at this point. As you start adding substrate concentration, and substrate concentration go higher than the enzyme concentration, you see, few enzymes start taking on substrate. So you are 1 point around here. So as you add more substrate, so you see more enzymes start working. At this point, how many enzymes in the total enzyme is working? All of them, right? So you reach now Vmax, right? You cannot go beyond that. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. At the V0 here, you have a V0. A portion of enzyme complex are working, but if you reach a Vmax, all the enzymes are working. That's why K2 is times ET, but here K2 times ES. Is that clear? Good. So now, if I want to increase the maximal velocity, what can I do? Add more enzyme, right, good. So the questions came about here. In what scenario Vmax and the enzyme can goes up or go down? So now you already answered to one, right? How about the other? If you want to decrease Vmax, what should you do? Take away the enzyme. And you could do that sometime in the lab by doing what? Enzymes, proteins, you put them on the heat or drop few chemicals in it, you kill the enzyme and the reaction, the velocity, Vmax start dropping. Is that clear? Okay. So that's what we have here. If you have a Vmax for enzyme concentration 1x, when you double the concentration, then you go twice as much. And the velocity also does the same thing. Is that clear? Good. And that's one way you can analyze enzyme presence. If you add a substrate, one has a higher Vmax compared to the other. So you say one enzyme either is more present or it's working better than the other. But I have an example we're going to talk about. I have a question set that we're going to talk about. It's probably going to make more sense to you. All right. So now Km. So Km, it's nothing else. It's numerically equal to the substrate concentration that give you half of the maximal velocity. Just like you have in hemoglobin, the P50 give you 50% saturation. in the enzyme catalyzed reaction, when the substrate concentration is equal to Km, the Vmax is equal to half. I mean, you are at half of the Vmax. The velocity is a half of the Vmax. Okay? When the substrate concentration is equal to Km. So Km, that's what really numerically what Km means. So if I give you a graph, I say calculate the Km, and you have a Vmax, what do? You look at the Vmax, you come to half of Vmax, you go to the curve, and it's the X value, which is the substrate concentration that gave you half of that Vmax, and right there you have your Km. Is that clear? So again, let me repeat this, don't make a mistake all the Km is not equal to half of Vmax. Is it? Is the Km equal to half of Vmax? No. Km is the substrate concentration that gives you half of Vmax. Km is the substrate concentration. Even the units are different. So Km is the substrate concentration that gives you half of Vmax. The unit here is in the molar or millimolar, and here this is the speed. So concentration is not equal to speed, okay? It's a concentration that gives you a speed. All right. So now the second is, it is a characteristic of an enzyme. So the lowest the Km, what is the affinity? Remember, hemoglobin, the P50 is lower, the affinity is what? Higher, exactly. Same thing applies here. When the Km is lower, the affinity is higher. When the Km is higher, the Km is higher, the affinity is lower. Okay, good. So it does not vary. So for enzyme, for any given enzyme, and its relationship with a specific substrate, the Km is constant. Okay. Now the enzyme can work on a different substrate and have a different Km toward that substrate, but for the Km for the specific enzyme and specific substrate, if there is a relationship, Km is always constant. Okay. And another one here, and this is where there's issues, but what I'm saying, sometimes it can change. It can. It doesn't mean it's always change. It can change with the temperature and the pH, and you will not see that in the question because it is ambiguous. And in the book, some said, a certain enzyme, when the substrate concentration changes, the temperature changes, Km increases and so forth. So it can affect the velocity, but Km, it's not all that clear, okay? So, but the temperature and pH can change the velocity of the enzyme catalyzed reaction. But Km and the Vmax still depend on the conditions, okay? All right. So here you can calculate Km numerically using K1 and K2 for K1. So basically the two rate constant of dissociation over the rate constant of association, or ES complex. Now, as I said here, you have an enzyme E1 and an enzyme E2. They both work on the same substrate, okay? The Km for enzyme 1 is right there, and the Km for enzyme 2 is here. Which one has the highest affinity for this substrate? Km1, right? Because it has the lowest Km, and Km2. So they're even though two different enzymes, but they're both working on the same substrate. And this is very, very important in terms of physiology. You'll see when we're going to talk about the glucokinase and exokinase. They have different Km for the glucose, okay? All right. So now, as we mentioned earlier, if the Vmax for enzyme catalyzed reactions now reach a Vmax, the velocity reach a Vmax, the way you can increase the velocity is to add more enzyme, right? Good. All right. So that's what this was about. Now the order of the reactions. So the order of reaction, when you add the substrate, basically what it means, there is a direct proportionality. Basically, the velocity is directly proportional to the substrate. Okay, when you have a first order reaction. Okay, so directly as you increase substrate concentration, you have a response to product formation. So at that point, you have first order. Now, if the reaction depends on two substrates, there will be a second order. Now, if the reaction reaches this point, Vmax, does it depend on the substrate concentration? No, you say no? Yes. No. The answer is yes, is no. Because, yes, the answer is no. Are we on the same page? So the answer is no, okay? At that point, the reaction, the velocity doesn't depend on the substrate concentration. Is that clear? At that point, the order is a zero order. You can add as much substrate concentration you want, you won't have a velocity, all right? So there is no correlation at that point, the substrate between the substrate and the velocity. Is that clear? Did that confuse you? No, it's clear, good, all right. So basically you have a zero order here, no matter how much substrate concentration you add, the velocity it will not change. But here there is a direct correlation, as substrate concentration increase, velocity increase. So that's the first order. Now if it was two substrate required for velocity, then it was the second order. Is that clear? Good. All right, the turnover. You remember the K2 that convert the ES complex to EP to product? So that's the E2 that you have here called the K-cat. You call that the catalytic rate constant. And this is very, very important. It basically tells you how capable is the enzyme to take in the substrate and flip it to a product, okay? So now, you remember this formula when I said Vmax, it's K-cat, which is a K2 times ET. So basically what that means, the catalytic constant for one enzyme times the total concentration of enzyme, okay? So if you wanna estimate the power of 10 men, so you take the capacity of, well, let's say all 10 of them have the same exact capacity. So you take the capacity of one of them, or you multiply that by what? The capacity of 10 men, and if you wanna take the capacity of the whole together, what should you do? The capacity 1 times how many? 10, exactly. So exactly that's what we have here. As you see, the capacity of one man times the number of men, you know, their output. Should I back up? All right. Let me use the enzyme instead of me. Probably that was confusing. All right. If you want to measure the capacity of 10 enzymes, okay, total together, the output at any given time. So basically what I'm saying, the catalytic constant, the capacity of one enzyme times 10, right? So that's what we have here. The Vmax, the maximum velocity of enzyme catalyzed reaction, is the catalytic constant of one enzyme times the number of enzymes. Does that make sense? All right, great. So that's your Vmax, and the K-cat, which is the K2, if you recall, the K-cat times ET is your Vmax, and the catalytic rate constant, again, is this K2 here. Now, the reason I'm emphasizing on this, I have labeled the K, this way, K1, K minus 1, K2. A certain book, they may come and say, this is a K1, this is a K2, this is a K3, and the other one could be K4. So I want you to know, no matter what is the labels here, this is your K-cat. The rate constant that convert ES to product, okay? So keep that in mind, okay? And most books put it this way, K2, which is this way, but some books put it at K3. And no matter what, it's always the way that convert ES to EP. Is that clear? All right. Because I know you guys, sometimes you like to read different books in case you see that so you don't get lost in it. It's always this case. It's called K-cat, the turnover, and so forth. All right. So again, as I put here, the K-cat is equal to K2 in our condition, okay? So basically what it means, the number of substrate converted to product per time, and usually per second, okay? Because enzyme catalysis is measured per second. So the amount of substrate converted to product per time, or reciprocally, you can say the amount of product forms per time, or the amount of time that is required to take one substrate and flip it to a product. Same thing, okay? Should I repeat that? The amount of substrate turned to product over time, or the time that take to take one substrate to flip it to a product. It's the same thing. All right, this is how you calculate, and I gave you, I hope you went over to try to solve it. So basically, the ET, you know, what I said here, in a beaker, we have mixture of enzyme E that contain a total concentration of 1 molar, 0.1 molar, and when all the enzyme active sites are full with substrate, we are what? Vmax, right? So when all the enzyme active sites are full with substrate, we are Vmax, and the Vmax is equal to 60,000 mole per second. And what is the Kcat? Again, you go back to the formula, Vmax is equal to K2 times ET, right? You remember that? Or K2, Kcat times Vmax, ET. So Vmax is Kcat times the total enzyme. So you know this, you know Vmax, and what else you know? You know the enzyme, right? And what you're looking for is this guy, all right? So very simple. So you said, okay, if that is the case, Kcat will be Vmax over this one. Basically, you take this and flip it down here, and that's what you have, all right? So Kcat is a Vmax over ET, okay? So so you know Vmax value, you know the ET, so you do the division, and the unit here, so you can simplify. So you have 600,000 per second, okay? So that is, or you can do the reciprocal. So basically, you take and do the division, 1 over 600,000. So at the end of the day, you have 1.7 times 10 to the minus 6 seconds. So that's the time it takes for this enzyme to take a substrate and flip it to a product. Is this clear? Can you do this? Good. All right, so it's very simple, and then you can do the calculation. All right, so now the efficiency, again, it's a Kcat over Km, but again, some books also call it Vmax over Km because Vmax times ET, which is Vmax, is a Kcat times ET. So it's going to be the same similar relationship. But as far as we're concerned, efficiency is a Kcat over Km, okay? So that's the efficiency of the enzyme. So basically what it means, you know, the capacity of enzyme to flip substrate to a product, even at the lowest substrate concentration, okay? So the measure of efficiency indicates how well the enzyme works at the low substrate concentration, okay? Again, it is a Kcat over Km. So rapid turnover, so you have a large Kcat, high affinity for the substrate is low Km, remember that? So not only if the enzyme has a high efficiency, so at the low substrate concentration, low Km, you know, it comes to the enzyme, and it has a capacity to flip the substrate to product very quick. So the efficiency is high, okay? Not only you can rush to a substrate, take it and flip it quickly, so at that point you see more product formation very quick, because the enzyme not only has a high affinity for the substrate, but it also has a high capacity to flip it to a product, okay? So if you take this to Kcat over Km, it gives you the efficiency. But this is the real definition. But sometimes, because the Kcat times ET is a Vmax, some books say the efficiency is a Vmax over Km. But I'll make sure if I'm testing you, I'm not going to give you one way or the other. I mean, I'm not going to give you both. So basically, this is what we go by. Is that clear? But I'm saying, if you, in case you see in the books, don't panic. Yes, sometimes they put it that way, but this is the correct way. Is that clear? Good. All right. So I gave you a few enzymes here with the Km value, the Kcat value, and then the efficiency. And, you know, just take a look at it. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it. Which one seemed to be the most efficient one here? Which one? Look at just the efficiency. Look at this guy. So the fumate seems to be the highest one here. Now, there is another enzyme called the isomerase. The isomerase has the efficiency around 10 to the 8 to 10 to the 9 per second, basically more per second. So it's a very, very efficient enzyme. Uh, and this is very close to the diffusion value. Basically, once this enzyme is present, when the substrate is here, whatever it is, it will take it quickly and you flip it. So it is a very, very efficient, and that's the triose isomerase. Is that clear? Yes? Okay. I'm not gonna, I know it's a very hard, it's a little tough, complex concept too, so I'm not gonna really ask you about, but the formula you need to know, okay? And how to calculate. Now, it turns out the double reciprocal plot, when you look at the Michaelis-Menten kinetics, especially the plot, it has some limitation. You know, when we had the Vmax, okay, it's very, very difficult to get the real Vmax using Michaelis-Menten plot. Because as you add the substrate, when the substrate concentration is high to a certain level, at any given time, you probably have a slight increase of the Vmax, depending on the conditions. But so the Vmax is very, very hard to determine exactly the value. And they want to get the value exactly, the Km exact, okay? You do not want approximation. So this guy, Leinenweber here, developed a plot, okay? He said, okay, the best way to determine Km as a Vmax is to get a straight line where you can point to a point where the Km and the Vmax can be. So basically what he did is took the Michaelis-Menten's equation and it solved it. But in this case, what he did is take the entire formula and flip it upside down, basically the inverse. So he said in the x-axis it's 1 over s over 1 over velocity. If you recall on the Michaelis-Menten plot, it's a substrate concentration, and this axis you have a velocity. What he did is here in the x-axis, you take the substrate concentration, you inverse it, and you take a velocity, the corresponding velocity, inverse it, okay? So he solved it and have, so the x is equal to, basically, this is your x here, your y, and this is your s here. So Km over V max s plus the 1 over V max. Basically, when you solve this, the inverse, basically you get this straight line equation. Again, we're not going to go through the solving the equation. It's a few steps, but you don't need to know all that. Basically, I want you to be able to utilize the plot, okay? So now, so this is your y, basically. But the most important piece is the plot. So this is your y, this is your 1 over s is your x, and this is this is your intercept, and this is your slope here, okay? Is that clear? So 1 over s is your x, this is your y, this is your slope, and this is your intercept, okay? And again, we're not going to go to math, okay? So I just want to point it out to you in case you want to understand the equation. But what I'm interested in you to know is this, okay? And if you want to know this, we can go over that, not here, but you don't need to know all the steps to get to this point. But anyway, so basically what he did, he developed a straight line, okay? So at any given substrate concentration, to draw a straight line, how many points do you need? 2, right? So you only need to use 2 substrate concentration and their corresponding velocity. So which makes things easier. In the Michaelis-Menten, you need to plot all the substrate concentration against the velocity to have a curve. But in his case, you only need 2 substrate concentration and their corresponding velocity. You take each one of them, you inverse them, and you plot them. So 1 over s, and you take the corresponding 1 over v0, so you have one point. You take a second one, 1 over s, and the corresponding 1 over v max, 1 over v0, and you point the point, and then you put a straight line. Is that clear? So now, once you put the straight line, the point where this line crosses the 1 over v0 axis, your y-axis, is the 1 over v max. And the point where the straight line hit the x, your x-axis, which is 1 over s, it's a minus 1 over km. So now if I give you a curve, okay, and I ask you to calculate Vmax or determine the Vmax in km, can you do that? Okay, good. So you take this, and I think I have some things here. So now this is example. So you get two substrate concentration and then two velocity, corresponding to velocity, and you inverse them and you plot them, the x, the y. So you draw the straight line. So basically you have, what's this point? Minus 1 over km. How about here? 1 over Vmax, now minus 1. Make that correction on your the Vmax, 1 over Vmax, it's not minus, it's just 1 over Vmax. And I think that is in your, here. So the Km now, I will point it out where you should make a correction. So now if you want to calculate the Km, what do? Did you take a look at this? No, I don't think you got this far, but you have it on the other one. But anyway, so what you do, you say, okay, this is minus 1 over Km, right? And what is the rule value on the plot? Minus 1 over Km is equal to what? What is the value? What is the value? Negative 0.5. Know how to read this. This is nothing complicated, right? So know how to read. When you hit this point where the line hit the x-axis, it's a minus 1 over Km, and when you read it, it's a minus 0.5. Whatever value you have there, it's equal to minus 1 over Km. Is that clear? All right. So you say minus 1 over Km is equal to minus 0.5. You have to write it down. You have to. Let me put it this way. Do not try to do this quickly. Write it down. And another thing I want to add it to you, on it, the Km value, you calculate the Km value. Basically, you take this Km, you flip it over 1, okay, which is have here. So Km over 1, you take the negative sign here, negative sign. It's a 1 over 0.5. Is that clear? And you solve it. So 1 divided by 0.5 is 2 millimolar, okay? So that's your Km. Now, I know you're going to find sometimes confused with the sign. Km doesn't have any sign, okay? Basically, it is positive. So you don't have any negative Km. So if you do your calculation, you find the negatives on it, you can find yourself to it, take the negative sign out. There is no negative Km, okay? So that will help you to exclude out some of those confusion. Is that clear? The Km is always positive. So basically what I just said, this is the point is 0.5, is correspond to minus 1 over Km. So 0.5 minus 0.5 is equal to minus 1 over Km. These two are equal. Only thing you have to do is to solve it. You take the minus out of here, you take the minus out of here. Now you can inverse them. So Km over 1, 0.5 over 1 over 0.5, and then you solve it and you have your value. Okay? Is this clear, Oxcom? Okay, good. All right, so now let's calculate 1 over Vmax. That's even a little bit easier because you're not dealing with the signs, right? The negative sign. Again, you can take it out from, once you write your formula down, your equation down, your equality down, take it out the negative sign directly because you don't need to work with it, as I said here. Now, same thing here. This is where I was saying corrected on your slide. I think you have minus 1 over Vmax. There is no 1 minus 1. It's just 1 over Vmax. And again, I'm going to ask them to upload this slide for you so you have this stuff, okay? I know you don't have it. I thought you were going to try to solve it yourself. Now I have solved it, and then I will upload it for you. Is that clear? So you have this. So now this point is what? Somebody tell me. 1 over V max, right? So at that point you have, which is 0.02, right? So you specifically write it down. 1 over V max is equal to 0.02. Write it down. 1 over V max is equal to 0.02. So that way you do not have any problem. If you don't write it down, try to solve it, it's a little bit difficult. But in any case, at the end of the day, you do the division 1 over 0.02, and that will be your 15 micromolar per second. So that's your Vmax, and this is your Km. And these things have a significant meaning. You know, when you're taking the blood sugar, you taking food stuff, your blood sugar start rising up, okay? The first thing that your body trying to do is to make your tissues take on the sugar and utilize it, right? Now, if you have an excess of sugar, what should happen? What do you want to do if you have extra sugar floating around? Your tissues has enough. What do you want to do? Storage, right? And this is where these two enzymes come to play. Hexokinase is found in most tissues, okay? And the glucokinase is found in the liver. Look at the Km value. Which one has the highest affinity for glucose? Hexokinase, right? And the glucokinase has the least. Now, can anybody explain to me why is that? Look at it very closely. The Km value, 2 Km value. So basically, the glucokinase will sit down and look at the glucose, will not touch it until it comes close to the concentration reach what level? Close to 15, right? At that time, what hexokinase is doing? Hexokinase is phosphorylating the glucose and take it in, right? In the tissues. So the hexokinase phosphorylates the glucose and trap it in the tissues. But at that time, the glucokinase is in the liver, glucose getting, but as long as the concentration of the blood glucose do not reach 15 millimolar, hexokinase, or close to that, hexokinase would not touch it, okay? So until when you reach it, which means you have too much glucose floating around, so hexokinase will now start trapping glucose inside your liver so it can form glycogen for storage purpose. Does that make sense? So the hexokinase is found in most tissues, so the tissue will start utilizing it because hexokinase will phosphorylate them and trap them inside your muscle tissue so they can be utilized for energy purpose. You will see that when you start talking about glycolysis, okay? Now, in the liver, the purpose is to storage, to a certain extent, at least in this condition, to store glucose. So the liver, the glucokinase will not touch the glucose until the level in the glucose goes sky high to 15 molar. At that point, it starts phosphorylating the glucose and trap it in the liver so it can be laid down as a glucogen. So glucogen can form, and then you have storage for glucose. But we're going to talk about gluconeogenesis later on. Maybe we're going to talk about this a little more to clear it up for you. At least you have an idea, right? So the glucokinase will not touch glucose, so glucose will not be storage until the level reaches a certain point, okay? All right. Is this clear? At least you have an idea, right? All right. So this is the case, and it will say that if you look at it, you have two patients, healthy one and a sick one. Now, you took an enzyme, you saved the same enzyme, you purify it at 97%, so the enzyme is pure. Let me clear this one up. When you do kinetic catalysis ACEs, it's a pure enzyme, okay? But in this case, this enzyme is now pure from both patients, healthy and unhealthy one in this case. So the results are plotted here. This is for patient that is sick, and this is for patient that is healthy. So based on that, what is really happening? You remember, and then the same enzyme concentration is used in both assays. Why the Vmax is different? Oh, I gave you the answer, right? So what changed? Decreased Vmax. But that was not really my target. But I know, so Vmax had decreased. I'm so focused on one aspect. Why Vmax changed? Same enzyme concentration, same enzyme, same substrate, but the Vmax changed. Yeah, you already said the Vmax decreases. Why the two change? What's the difference? Same enzyme? Yes. Yeah, it is mutated, but what the mutation has done? Huh? Decrease the KCAT. All right. Here is, well, they didn't say exactly what really happened. Here is one possibility. You know you have a 2 allele on the gene, right? You have 2 alleles. Here, if the Km have changed, which means the enzyme will not touch the substrate until you reach a certain level, right? So the Vmax will not be affected, right? If the Km change, the Vmax will not change. I mean, the affinity change, it will not affect the Vmax that much. Because when you keep adding substrate, yeah, eventually the enzyme is going to use it. So what may have happened is the fact that you have a two allele, okay? One allele may have mutations on it, and the other one doesn't have it on. So they're both producing the same enzymes, but one is defective, but the other one is not defective, okay? So when that occurs, you're producing the enzyme, but one of them is not working at all. So it's like you decreasing by half of the enzyme concentration, even though the protein is there, but it's not really working. Does that make sense? So that's something that is occurring here. One allele is mutated, the other one is normal. So you're only working at half of enzyme concentration. Not like really you have half of the concentration, but half of the enzyme is not working because of the mutation. Is that clear? Good. All right, so enzyme activity can be affected by temperatures and so forth, and pHs, as I see. And this is one important thing. As the temperature increases, the enzyme catalytic reaction velocity goes up and later on drop. Why? Because the enzyme is protein, they get denatured, right? And this is why you do not want to leave kids in the car, hot in the summertime, because does that make sense? So the enzyme concentration goes up, the velocity goes up, and then decreases and drop to zero because you denature the enzymes completely, right? And same is true for pH. Certain enzymes have different pHs. It is true. Even now, recent stuff occurred in Florida when a driver left the kids in the car, and then the kids were dead, basically. It's a slow death because all the enzymes start dropping because of the heat. Enzymes of protein, they just basically get denatured, okay? Does that make sense? The same thing occurs in the pHs. Different enzymes have different, basically optimal pHs and so forth. But when the pH goes out of the hand, then it can be denatured as well. All right, so basically this is to compare Michaelis Menten and the double reciprocal plaque compared to them. Now, I want to bring in this last slide for you. So all enzymes are now proteins. Maximum 99% but some enzymes are just RNAs. I just wanted to know in case you read that. So it's not a big area in terms of enzyme, but some enzyme, this guy discovered basically an enzyme called ribosome found in the ribosome, and it has some enzymatic activity, okay? And I want to bring that to your attention. Any question at this point?